Hello, and welcome to those who are returning and to new viewers. This session is about news camera, but quite a lot more than just working the camera, because it's about journalism and skills and being there when history is being made. So, joining us from the ITN's Washington Bureau is Mark Davey. He has literally just won the RTS award for Best Factual Photography, beating, as he said, David Attenborough's Penguins. That was for some footage shot under extreme pressure in the Capitol Hill raids earlier this year. And we're going to be seeing that, obviously. But I thought it would be worth reading the citation because that sums up really what this session is all about. So the jury said that capturing history does not happen every day. This was a case study of how good camera operators know how to be in the right place at the right time and pick the right shots under extreme pressure. The world is a better place due to the footage captured by the camera work of the winner. So there we go. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
As ever, please ask questions via the chat button and we'll try and get them answered by Mark. But before we go into the details of exactly what the job entails, you famously said that you left school with 3 Fs at A level.
Yeah, that wasn't a shining moment. I was just a bit of a lost soul, and I was at school and didn't know what university was for. Couldn't see the direct connection between it and work. I liked working, but I just studying wasn't my thing at the time. So yeah, I was a wee bit lost. But luckily, the job centre sent me to Ulster Television to have an opportunity to be their newsroom runner for a few months while their standard one, their normal one, was off. So I just never left. Really, I just kept working there, and then ITN took me on, and sort of here I am.
So when you went into that newsroom, obviously it is some years ago, I think that's fair to say. But what sort of skills were you soon to be immersed in?
Well, it was 1984. I think what the bosses who wanted to keep me on saw was a thirst for news and an enthusiasm to work hard and be interested in the stories beyond just the menial tasks I was performing. And so quickly they asked me to get into video editing, and so I started editing for the news shows. And luckily, I was quite fast, so that's a really useful quality in news for fast turnaround. Particularly in those days in Northern Ireland, there were breaking stories minutes up to and including during the broadcast. So it was very intense, fast turnaround editing. So being able to cope with that under pressure. I've always said that, and we always say that only one person in an edit suite can panic. So you can take it in turns, but both of you can't panic or the piece doesn't make air. So I was a fairly calm set of hands most of the time.
So you still edit in your current role, but what was it that gave you the break into being behind the camera?
Moving to ITN, I did some holiday cover for them for a couple of weeks to cover for their staff people, and after that, they asked me to come and work for them. And at that point, right in the mid 80s, that was when the whole sort of multi-skilling, as it was called then, revolution was happening, where there was an expectation that you wouldn't just be a camera person or an editor or a sound recordist or a lighting person, that actually, you would potentially do all these things. So I was just sent out with a camera and told to get on with it.
Literally just that. I mean, did anybody take you under their wing to kind of show you where the buttons were, or?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I had some very kind colleagues. Yeah, no, they did. But the main point they made was, look, just go out there and make your mistakes, and when you bring the material back, we'll tell you what's wrong with it. And that's what, anytime now when I'm training anybody or anybody is asking me advice, that's what I tell them: just go out and film, and then look at it and tell yourself what's wrong with it, and ask other people what's wrong with it and what's right with it, of course.
So we're going to move to the first clip, which is on your home patch of Belfast. Do you want to set the clip up, Mark, and explain what we're about to see? And then we'll watch the clip and then we'll discuss the ins and outs.
Yeah, I was trying to think when you asked me about clips to think of a few parables that might have something more than just the material and, oh, isn't it exciting? This story is one of those because our bosses in London had no interest in us covering what you're about to see. They didn't know it was going to happen. We felt that we did know it was going to happen. We heard a lot of noise on the ground and locally that there was going to be trouble that weekend, that the loyalist protesters who had been denied the opportunity to march were very angry, and that this was kind of their line in the sand, or their last stand, whatever cliche you choose. And so we kept pushing them for them to send a reporter over from London because there wasn't one at the time. They said no, but they did agree to hire a freelance, Lisa McAllister, who came out with us on the streets. And honestly, we were being kept so far back by the police that we were on our way back to the vehicle to just go home for lunch, or go home for the day. I said, look, it's a Saturday. We're not getting anywhere. This isn't going to get on air. Let's give up. And my colleague, Mark Jervis, said, well, look, let's just try down this little side street that he happened to know. So there's just a chance that they haven't closed it. And that's what you're about to see. It's entirely exclusive material. All our competitors, even our colleagues in Ulster Television, were all wrong-footed. They didn't get any of this material. And then, just as it was really kicking off, as we would say in those days, a soldier turned to me and said, "I've just done 6 months in Basra, and I've never seen anything like this." And so I instantly bonded with him because I knew the camp that he'd stayed in Basra, and I mentioned it. And suddenly they took me under their wing and they put me safely in a place where I could film. And we just were able to film, without being removed from the scene. So that probably sets it up.
Shall we see the clip?
Thank you.
Soldiers under attack in Belfast, in a day when it looked like the city had rolled back 30 years. Just one of hundreds of blast bombs thrown at security forces. The attacks have been widespread and sustained. The rioting erupted after a Protestant Orange Order parade was prevented from marching through a Catholic area. Angry at the decision, the order called for people to come onto the streets and show their support, and they did, with violence. Scenes like these have been springing up across Belfast all day. In this street, which is just off the main parade route, soldiers and police officers have come under sniper fire. As far as we're aware, there are also unexploded blast bombs still in the middle of the road, and there are still gunmen in the area. Several police officers have been injured and one person was shot. And as darkness fell across the city tonight, the violence escalated. Security forces are preparing for a long night. Lisa McAllister, ITV News, Belfast.
So a pretty hairy situation to be in, really quite near what you might call the front line. You made reference previously to a soldier taking you under his wing because he'd been in Basra. I think it would be fair to say that you'd already done a spell in Iraq by this time.
Yeah, that's right. And I'd stayed in the very camp that he'd been based in for 6 months. So I just asked him, how are things in the Shat Al Arab, which is the name of the camp? And he just, his eyes lit up and he said, you've been there, and he just felt the connection. And that's when they told me to get into the garden that you saw me filming from. And they just let me stay there and film as much as I wanted. They felt I was in a reasonably safe place. I mean, to be honest, they don't have the authority to throw me out, but they still were happy to have me there. And it made things so much easier. It was great to have that connection.
So relationships between, I want you to talk about who you were with the crew that day, but relationships are king in this job, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no absolute advice, and like one of the crucial things people say is trust your instincts. Absolutely, you trust your instincts, but you also listen to your colleagues and you listen to the people on the ground that you're meeting, and you just have to hopefully figure out which things to listen to and which not. And in this case, if I hadn't listened to my colleague Mark, we wouldn't have got that material. But I said, okay, fine, we'll have one more chance. And so having the humility to say I was 100% wrong, and just get on with that is important, as well as trusting instincts.
And so just describe what it was like being there in Belfast, very close to bombs, fire. Do you ever feel at risk, afraid in the job?
Not really. I think it's slightly helpful that you're just focusing on what you're doing. You're just kind of getting on with it. I think if I was in one of those situations without a camera, I'd probably be terrified. But because that's just why we're there, I'm thinking, where is the position I can be without, adding to the danger that I'm under? You weigh up which side of the community divide you're working behind or in front of, and whether it's safe to be with them or not. You try and reassure the protesters that you're not trying to film them to get them arrested. You weigh up whether to be behind police and army lines, because obviously there's incoming petrol bombs and stones coming towards you then, or are you on the other side with the protesters who may be hit by plastic bullets and other non-lethal, hopefully, things that the police and army are firing at them. So no, I don't recall being really very scared at any point, because you're there for a reason, and you just get on with it and get out as quickly as possible once you've got the material you need.
So obviously this is a situation where it is unfolding in front of you. There's nothing constructed about this. It's completely outside of your control. But instead of one big GV, how do you decide exactly what you're going to pick up in terms of action, in terms of how it will cut and how it will tell a story?
Well, in a situation like that, firstly, if we saw the original camera rushes for that day, they'd be very messy. I mean, you can see a lot of messiness in the piece itself. There's moments where I'm pulling out roughly, and those are all moments where I'm reframing to try and get a different angle, but some action has occurred, so we just used it anyway. It's very much rough and ready. And so I would just be recording constantly, but changing shot, so that, obviously just the basics, beginning with a wide shot and then moving into a mid shot, and then finding something tight to focus on that allows you to use that shot as a way to cut to any other shot. And in particular, if the wide shots are good, you need different shots to break them up when you're editing, so that you have options. So, I mean, we probably threw away 3/4 of the material that day, because you're just rolling constantly. But also, I say about changing shot, that you also have to have the patience of just saying, I'm going to hold on this shot until something happens in it. Because with something so lively, you can't just get a wide shot and think, oh, I have a wide shot, good, that's covered. It's not, because nothing has happened in it. So you just keep recording and you wait. And once you feel that some action has taken place in that wide shot, then you think about changing shot, and you note that in your head. The end of that shot is the bit I'm going to use in the edit, because you often don't have very much time to edit the piece. Like, we're usually an hour and a half, 2 hours to put the piece together. So
how much footage would you be looking at to edit something? It was about a 2-minute VT, wasn't it? So how much time? 2 hours to edit 2-minute VT. How much material?
That was probably, I'd have to guess, maybe 45 minutes or 50 minutes of material. But, I've worked with some people who are incredibly disciplined with their in-camera editing, where they don't waste a moment. And you can get a 2-minute piece out of 5 or 6 minutes of material if the person filming it's really good.
So as we're beginning to hear, many skills, journalism, instinct, relationships, but another skill at the very top of your list is logistics. So when we move on to the next clip, it was about logistics in your mind. So perhaps you'd set up the clip. What was the story about?
Yeah, it was the very sad tale of the Nepal earthquake. And we had a team there doing the primary story of the earthquake itself and all the tragedy around that. But there had also been a lot of deaths at Everest Base Camp. And Emma Murphy and I got into the country as a second or third team who were supposed to then find stories away from the main story. And our bosses asked us to go to Everest Base Camp and film there. And I said, that's ridiculous. It's an absurd suggestion. You have to acclimatize to go anywhere near Everest Base Camp. It would be weeks. So they said, well, just try, will you? And so we did a bit more research and discovered that you actually can go there for a very short period of time. And that's when the challenges really kicked in then, because people do say the cliche about TV news is it's 90% logistics. But it's a cliche because it's true. We eventually got to the little settlement of Lukla in the mountains of Nepal. It's over 3,000 meters in height. So the minute you arrive there, you're a little bit delirious with altitude, like just a wee bit sort of out of breath, and you don't sleep at night, and it's already challenging. And we get there and we negotiate with helicopter people who we have been recommended to talk to. And we ask them how long we can be up at Everest Base Camp, and they say 1 hour. And we say to ourselves, well, it's going to be very hard to film a piece in an hour. And as the conversation goes on, they mention the second helicopter, and we get confused. And we ask them again, and they say, oh, well, we'll have to come back and collect you. And given the chaos of the situation in Nepal at that stage, we weren't comfortable with that. We insisted that there was only one helicopter on grounds of safety. And we said, well, how long can we be up there with one helicopter? And they said 15 minutes. So we looked at each other and thought, well, there's not going to be much of a piece out of this. But we still thought it was worth going. So we flew up there, past the wreckage of the other helicopters that hadn't made it, because it's a very, very difficult flying environment. And we were dropped off for 15 minutes. And so we knew that we could only get 7.5 minutes away from the landing spot. I say new, I mean, everything was a bit vague because the camera weighed 3 times what it should. It was like being dropped on the moon with no spacesuit. I mean, I don't know what to compare it with. I have no comparison because it was just so difficult. And extraordinarily, Emma Murphy, the piece to camera you're going to see in this piece was one take. She just spoke to camera, she explained what had happened behind her, and then we went on with more filming some people way in the distance who started to come closer to us. It felt like in slow motion. And they walked straight up to the camera and said, hello, we're the Gurkhas, which was just this incredible moment. We're working for a British news organization. There's nobody within reach of us. And then suddenly the Gurkhas turn up to give us an interview. And we get on the helicopter, we get down to a middle spot where we're refueling.
Sorry, can I interrupt, Mark? So shall we see the clip and then you can explain a bit further afterwards? Thank you. Let's see the clip.
The sight and sound of the helicopter means only one thing these days: the return of the victims of Saturday's avalanche. There is little ceremony, but much respect, as wrapped in sleeping bags or tarpaulins, the dead are brought from the mountain to begin their journey back to those who mourn them. The bags they packed, no doubt in excitement, being transported with their bodies. Nature, it seems, has little respect for the spirit of adventure. Those who perished did so in the Khumbu Valley. We travelled there today. Its tranquility and splendour belied the dreadfulness of what happened here. The tiny towns show the first signs of the earthquake. Walls down, homes damaged. But it is close to base camp where the worst effects were felt, as avalanches engulfed those below. Some people have stayed here, but most of these tents are abandoned. And it's hardly surprising, because from the ground you can see the crushed tents of many of the dead. Most of those still on the mountain are now leaving. This is the British Army's Gurkha expedition team.
The Gurkhas, hi.
All 17 survived.
Well, we were up on the mountain when the earthquake hit. There was a lot of commotion at the top, and then suddenly there was a series of avalanches. It was almost as if all three sides of the valley opened up. When we came down 2 days later to see our tents, they were completely wiped out.
This is where the avalanche came down, covering the tents beneath, catapulting some from this side right across here. There have been some amazing feats achieved on this mountain, but surely April the 25th, 2015 will go down as one of Everest's darkest days. At the high altitude hospital in Ferice, they're used to dealing with those in trouble on Everest, but never before on this week's scale.
There was over 200 volunteers, and we received maybe 73 injured climbers that we safely evacuated back down to Kathmandu. And just as we'd finished, there was another earthquake. So still reeling from the aftershock.
For one of those who died, a New Zealand trekker, a traditional Sherpa funeral. Among the mourners, his friend Peter Hillary, son of Everest conqueror Sir Edmund. On this most unforgiving of mountains, triumph and tragedy are never far apart. Emma Murphy, ITV News, Everest.
So, remarkable place to land up and film. We can see what you mean by landing on the moon. But let's go back to your story about logistics part 2. So after you've filmed and you've had your quarter of an hour and you get back in the helicopter and you go back to the village, tell us how you got your footage out.
Yeah, because that's one of the big challenges is, it's all very well filming this great stuff, but how are you going to broadcast it? So we have a device that we travel with, which is a BGAN, which points at a satellite. But, the first satellite I looked at when I got out of the tea house we were staying in, there's a mountain in the way. There's just no way. So I turn around the other way, another mountain. There's just no chance that we can get the piece out by that method. So our brilliant fixer, Mandil, I said to him, we've got one more mission for you. Find the mother lode of internet in this village, and we need to plug in directly to it because the shared internet in the village was too slow to get our piece out. So we needed to get to wherever it was, plug in, and send it. It would take 10 minutes in that scenario, and we would be done. Then there was a power outage in the village. All the lights went out. Came back on, no internet. And we learned that the person who had the key to the room that had access to where the internet was to reset it was off the mountain, probably because of some part of the crisis. So there was no internet, and I'm still editing the piece while still at the same time talking to Mandil and others to try and work out how on earth we get the piece out. Are we going to fly the next day and play it the next day, which would be okay, but it would just feel like we'd missed an opportunity. And one of my colleagues had been sitting chatting to two Special Forces American guys who had been working with the Nepali mountain rescue. And he'd seen that they had this very tiny little device that he was curious about, and he was asking them about it. It pointed to a different satellite. So he chatted to them. They said, it's civilian technology, not military. Don't see why you couldn't use it. We plugged it in. It was painfully slow. We watched this little progress bar go in slow motion, but the piece got to London 5 minutes before our evening news program and managed to make air. And basically the Green Berets got our piece out. Like, just, thinking out of the box, it doesn't really cover that. It was just incredible good fortune and lucky that we got it out.
So you say good fortune, but problem solving is a huge part of your job, isn't it? Finding solutions to the amazing challenges you face.
It is. No, it is. You have to keep finding ways around things whenever you're stuck. There's no point where you can just say, oh, well, we tried. You just have to keep going and figure out, hopefully, another solution to the problem. That one, I was stumped. until luckily my colleague managed to find a solution. And of course, that's the other lesson. Have your, everyone can be the person who comes up with the answer. It doesn't have to be you. So maybe, I was lucky that Paul was there that day, who was the colleague.
So do you think you can learn resourcefulness and the kind of things you need to do your job? Do you think they're learned or they're inbuilt in your character?
I think it's definitely both. You can absolutely learn these things. The fundamental thing, though, that you have to build on is common sense. If you don't have a level of common sense to begin with, I think that's very hard to learn. But building on it, and most crucially, learning from mistakes, and being comfortable with making mistakes, being comfortable with owning up to mistakes. I got that wrong. I'm sorry. Now we're moving on. Is really important. So you can definitely learn, and it's just a question of being adaptable and being willing to know that you don't know what's going to happen in the next moment.
So your career has taken you through the Beijing Bureau, across Asia, and now you're in Washington. Tell us a little bit about what your average day might hold. Diary, off diary, what do you actually do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, a good question. It's quite varied in some respects, but it kind of breaks down to when we're in DC and when we're not. So when we're in DC, I come into the office about 9 o'clock. We are hopefully aware of what events the president might be engaged in, or whether there's something happening just a quarter of a mile away at Capitol Hill, if there's some big vote on. So that the day-to-day politics of the States is of interest to a UK audience, because these are consequential decisions they're making, spending money or making big infrastructure investments, whatever it might be. So those days are quite routine. You can see, well, you can't really, but there are some of the screens behind me that where all the incoming feeds are routed through. So we have to keep an eye on those constantly to see what news story is breaking in case it's one we don't know about. And then that's when we have to pivot to something that's breaking. There'll be a helicopter shot will appear that turns out to be some tragic accident or mass shooting event, or all kinds of things like that. And that's when we then have to make a decision whether we do the story from here in DC or we get on a plane. And the minute we get on a plane, then it's a completely different way of working, because we simply have a camera and a laptop and we just go off as we did in Nepal. We travel light, and we just try and figure out again the logistics of getting there, allowing for the time difference, whether we can get there in time to do a live shot for our evening program and maybe an edit and live for the news at 10. So that's where the variety starts to kick in whenever we go off to other parts of the States to cover other stories.
And typically, how much time would you spend on a routine job?
If it's a news event, we are probably filming between 9 and 11:30, and then we're editing for 1:30, which is the evening news, 6:30 your time. And then we try and do a little more filming if there's time, and edit for news at 10, which is 5 p.m. where we are. If there's a time to pre-film and predict that something's happening and do a feature on something, we'll spend a little more time. But it's usually quite short and intense. We wouldn't often spend more than a day or two on a piece. Maybe an environment piece where you have to travel to 2 or 3 different locations and spend a lot of the time spent would be traveling, an 8-hour drive somewhere to get a few pictures and then move on to the next place. But typically the breaking news stuff, it all just unfolds very, very quickly. And luckily in DC, we have because of the time difference, we have an operation where one of us is editing and the other is filming often. So you can then carry on and get more material while the edit is being completed.
And in addition to you and your multi-skilled colleague doing camera editing, who else are you working with? Who else is in that team?
So yeah, there are two of us who shoot and edit, and then there is our correspondent. We actually have two correspondents here most of the time now, Robert Moore and Emma Murphy, and then we have a production team. So there's a producer who would come with us on a story like that, and they would be, while we're trying to focus on filming and speaking to people, they would be massively responsible for the logistics of the operation, and it would be a discussion, but they would be the ones taking action, making sure that we have a car to get into to get to the story, and hotel rooms to sleep in. Where we will edit is, does the hotel have good enough internet to send the piece? Like fundamental stuff like that, or these things will let you down if you haven't done your research.
So we're going to roll with the clip straight away. This is the award-winning Capitol Hill protest, which is recent. So let's see the clip and then we can talk about it afterwards.
Emboldened extremists were colliding with ill-prepared policing.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
There was anger the president hadn't joined them.
Where's the president? Where the fuck is he when we need him, really?
But by now, the confidence of the crowd was high.
USA! 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 USA!
And then they breached the outer perimeter. And then we were over the threshold. Nearby, the crowd we were following had arrived in the crypt. And then I realized the protesters were being directed towards the office of Nancy Pelosi. And her wooden nameplate was torn off the wall and smashed with contempt. The perpetrator spotted our camera. He is still angrily pointing at us as a shard is held up to our camera as a trophy.
There you go, brother. We're normal people. Listen to me. We're normal people. You want to know the difference between people like us and Antifa and BLM? We respect the law. We were good people. The government did this to us. We were normal, good, law-abiding citizens, and you guys did this to us. We want our country back. We are protesting for our freedom right now. That's the difference.
What's the purpose of storming Congress?
Still, they are suspicious of our motives and who we represent.
He's holding them accountable. Who do you represent? What? Tell me one at a time. What news agency do you represent? British TV. We fought on your battlefield for you, my friend. They clearly...
So that could have turned quite ugly.
It had the potential, all right, yeah. I mean, we've been speculating ever since about why we weren't beaten up and our cameras weren't broken. Our camera wasn't broken. Certainly one of the things that helps is Robert's great gift for putting a microphone under somebody's nose and giving them an opportunity to speak. He would stop me frequently during that time in there saying, look, we need voices. You know, enough for the pictures, but they're both crucial. But if you don't have the context of what's happening by actually speaking to the people and interviewing them, you've just got dramatic pictures. You know, that's not enough to tell the story. And once you are in that position where there's a microphone and somebody is giving voice to their anger and to their issues and concerns, the people around are going, oh, well, those people are listening to us. When they don't feel listened to in so many other ways. I mean, that's one of their strongest complaints. So that definitely helps. So many other things that help. We're not US broadcasters. I'm convinced that Fox News, had they been in there that day, would have been lynched because they felt betrayed. The people in there felt betrayed by Fox for declaring the election in Arizona. CNN, MSNBC, I think any of those people would have struggled, and they were beaten up outside and their cameras were destroyed. So the foreignness definitely helped. And the slight otherness. I mean, honestly, I joke about the fact that especially that day, I was dressed and looked like a proud boy. Maybe that helped too. I don't know.
So how come you were the only crew that were actually with some of the so-called mob going in to Nancy Pelosi's office?
I don't know. I mean, we wonder about that to this day. And the mob breached the Capitol in 8 different places. And so when we heard that afterwards, we sort of assumed that there was a camera crew down. It's a big complex, and we thought there was a camera crew down every corridor, and that our colleagues were getting better stuff than us. I mean, we kept debating, should we move? Should we go here? Should we go there? We had no idea we were the only people in there until we were practically on air for News at 10, and that's when somebody explained to me that this was it. It was a very busy, chaotic situation outside. Maybe people were just engaged with filming that. I had really conflicted moments when we went under that area where you were sort of surrounded by tarpaulin on the presidential stage. That was my biggest concern, was we might get crushed in that environment. But looking out from there, I could see all the trouble that I was sort of missing. I couldn't film it because it was in that area. And so I was really conflicted with whether to stay with these people or not. If I hadn't stayed with them, we wouldn't have gone into the building. I decided that because we've access to agency material like CNN, we would just get that from them, and we would just take a punt, take a gamble with the people we were with. And that's how we ended up inside.
So it's journalistic skills really that are to the fore, thinking about how you're going to tell that story, and camera skills alongside it. But, you know, you're as much of a journalist as the rest of your team, aren't you?
Yeah. ITN has a long tradition of blurring those lines. We don't really think of ourselves in those kind of categories. If my correspondent or producer gets a shot on an iPhone that we put on our piece and it's the opening shot, I'm delighted. I have no issues with that. If I get a word into the script, then I'm pleased. You know what I mean? It's a collective. We're very fortunate. Some other organizations have more defined lines, and that's how they choose to work. But that's not how we operate, really. With primary roles, of course, but we're doing a lot more than that. And there was a long period where Sophie Alexander, our producer that day, and I were just on our own together, and we were collectively making decisions. At no point was anyone in charge that day. We were just discussing all the time: are we safe? How do we get out of this situation? How do we stay up and not get crushed? So it's very collaborative.
Are there any occasions where you feel you actually can't take your physical news camera with you and you go with phones?
There are a few. I mean, funny enough, over on Capitol Hill in a normal procedural day, they have rules where you're not allowed to film in the corridors. And my colleague Ben from Channel 4 has frequently done pieces on his iPhone, because the rule doesn't apply to phones. The rules are often behind technology in that sense. And yeah, there have been times where I've used little tourist cameras or iPhones because of sensitivity around where I've been filming and stuff. And the phones now are just extraordinary. I mean, the latest iPhone has the picture quality and sound quality is just phenomenal. So yeah, it's definitely an option.
So if you were wanting to give some advice to somebody who wants to follow in your footsteps, where would they start?
I think these days I wouldn't advise them to take my path. I think study hard and try and do some very focused courses on journalism and media training, as well as whatever else one might be studying. Bang on the doors of news organizations. The young people I see coming through and getting into the business are not content with just sort of sending little applications away, valid though they are, and you might get lucky or you might just be capable and get a placement somewhere, but just find somebody to pester in a news organization to say, I want to do this. This is this is my future, and I need your help to get me there.
And what about those skills as a camera operator? What would you encourage people to do to understand pictures and editing? And would you suggest they begin work with their phone?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, lately, when I've been on holiday, I make a little film with friends on the phone now because, if we're out on a boat trip or something, because it's so easy. And when you do that and you just make a little 3-minute video with music, you start to realize what you're missing in your filming. Like, oh, I should have had a close-up of that, or I should have had, a voice there. I mean, doing it and seeing what's missing and making mistakes and watching the news. I mean, watch the news and see the pieces that you admire and the pieces that you don't. We used to watch ITN when we were at Ulster Television and think, why are their pieces better than ours? And, we realized it was the editing style. It was probably the fact that they were shorter helped as well. So keep it punchy, keep it short. And you can edit all these things on your phone. So absolutely, I think it's a great place to start.
And how about ambitions? Obviously, you've done the Beijing Bureau, now DC. Where else would you like to tick off, as it were?
I hope that in the next couple of years we have more time to travel down to Central and South America, because I feel those parts of the world are massively underserved to a UK audience. There are stories there that we just don't have time to do because we don't have the resources. So I would love to spend more time down there trying to figure out what news we can bring from that part of the world.
And how do you reconcile all the travelling and the hours you do with family life? How does that work? Just so that we're all under no illusion about what you need to put into this job.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be if you're in a relationship, it has to be a very understanding one, and it has to be clear that the job is what it is, and the phone will ring in the middle of the night, and as it did a few weeks ago when Alec Baldwin unfortunately there was a terrible tragedy on film set, and the phone rang at 2:30, and it was my wife who was shaking me saying, I think you have to go to work now, if hopefully there's an understanding that if that's what you're aiming for, that you have a supportive team around you in terms of family, and I've been very lucky all my life to have that.
So does being an adrenaline junkie be part of?
Sorry, did you say no?
Being an adrenaline junkie.
Yeah, I would really hope not. If anybody is thinking of getting into this business because they're an adrenaline junkie, I would advise against it. I've met people in war zones who just seem to be there for some kind of thrill, and it often doesn't end well for them and for the people around them. The people who think that way are endangering not just themselves but the team members around them. We jokingly say our cowardice has stood us in good stead until now, but there is a serious point behind that. Everything is measured. It's a measured risk and a calculated risk. And whenever there's a risk of it being too dangerous, we don't go. And we always accept the sort of highest level of fear, the highest level of nervousness in a team is what governs what we do. So if one member of the team says, I'm not comfortable going down that street, we don't go down the street.
And do you ever work with security guards, or is it just always you and your team?
Very occasionally we do. I have done certainly in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's something I'm very nervous of. You see it more with American crews here. There were American crews in Minneapolis whose security people drew their guns, and I just think that's slightly insane, because you can't have a private army with you. Although actually on one occasion in northern Iraq, CNN did. They had 12 people, armed militia working for them, which was astonishing. I don't agree with that with that approach at all. And I wonder if one person armed, or we are, as a company policy, we will not have someone armed on our team, just to be clear, but the US have different views, and I would not be comfortable with having that person around, because first of all, I don't think they're going to win the fight, because they're one person. So that is a concern. And the issue with security guards, they can just ramp up the whole atmosphere. Our policy is to try and talk to people and reassure them that we're just there to observe, you know. So it actually, I should say, it depends on the security guard. I've met some very responsible folk who can calm a situation down, and you feel they're more like sort of hostage negotiators than private armies, and some of that can be valuable. If you can take the heat out of a situation, then you're valuable.
And finally, what story are you setting out to cover today?
We've been working for the last couple of days on the tragic story of Ahmaud Arbery, who was shot and killed while out jogging in Georgia. That trial's coming to an end. The jury is out, and they will come back with their verdict. Well, at any point, of course. By definition, you don't know when they're going to come back. So we've edited a piece about 3 minutes and 20 seconds long that tells the story. We have not told that story often for the UK audience, so this is a very basic, this is what happened way of telling the story. And then if the verdict comes out in time for our programme, we will make some minor adjustments to that piece and air that. And we're also preparing for the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. It starts next Monday in New York. So on Sunday or even Saturday, maybe we'll travel up to New York to cover that.
So Mark Davey, a fascinating career, and thank you very much for sharing some of your wisdom with us. And for those who are watching, please stay with us for the final session, which is cinematography. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.